Well, welcome everyone to today's podcast. We're going to talk about transitions and into the director role. And today I'm so excited to have Anthony with me here as a guest. Welcome, Anthony.
Thank you, Andrew. I appreciate it. Excited to be here.
Me too. I'm so excited to ask you lots of curious questions. But before we start, tell us a little bit about you.
So my name is Anthony Girolamo. Most recently was the SVP of engineering at Flex, which is a logistics technology company. Spent 4 years there. Prior to that, I spent almost 10 years at Amazon in various engineering leadership roles, primarily focused on building supply chain technology. Prior to that was at Microsoft, where I started my career as an engineer, and originally from the Midwest, went to school at the University of Michigan, so go Blue. It's been a very good year for them for football. Outside of work, I'm a father of two, so I have two boys that keep me very busy. We're very active. For folks that have worked with me, they know I love sports analogies, and so that might pop up throughout this conversation.
Oh, I'm happy to talk about that too. I'm a sports fan too. So
Awesome.
let's jump right in. Tell me a little bit about your transition into the director role. Oh, and before we start, tell me, were you invited into a role or was this always on your career development plan? Just to set some context.
I from a early age was lucky to find computer programming, and which led me into software engineering. And so I from a very early age knew that that's the direction I wanted to go. I knew I wanted to be an engineer because I loved to build, and I fell in love with computers at a young age. So I knew I wanted to pursue an engineering path. At Microsoft, I had the opportunity to do some tech lead work relatively early in my career, about 2.5 years in, and I really found that I enjoyed mentoring people, which dovetailed well with some experience I had in college doing graduate student instruction work.
Mhm.
That led me kind of to haphazardly fall into people leadership, where I stayed, I would say,
Well, what does that
heck of a
mean,
plan.
haphazardly? You have to tell me more.
I think I found myself just kind of saying, okay, well, this seems like a promotion. This seems like more responsibility. I guess I'll just keep doing it. I didn't really think like, oh, I want to become a people leader because I then want to run my own business. I want to run an organization. Um, I did it because it was just kind of the next step. And it probably stayed that way for a handful of years till maybe the middle of my career at Amazon, where I realized I really do enjoy this. And specifically, I enjoyed seeing people that I had worked with and led for long periods of time take on larger responsibilities themselves. And so probably about 10 years ago, I realized, what I really love is seeing organizations and people thrive and develop and grow into leadership roles. And that's where I wanted to focus my energy and effort.
Oh, I see. So it was a plan for you to.
It's more recently become a plan, yeah. And actually, I think as I took on more senior roles, certainly one of the things I had to learn was to be more mindful. It was less about what's the next step and what's 2, 3, 4 steps, or what do I think I want 2, 3, 4 steps down the road, and how can I think about ways of working backwards from that and building those skills or building those relationships now to see if that's a path I really want to take. And if it is, to set myself up for success in that.
Oh, well, let's dive into that. So let's dive into the challenges that you faced as you entered that role of leader of leaders. Tell
Yeah.
me, tell me more.
Yeah. Well, I think I made a lot of mistakes early in that. And, one of the things that caught me off guard and is really obvious in retrospect is turns out your title matters. And I think for a long time, I liked to believe that was not the case. And I'm Anthony. The day I was promoted to director, the day I was promoted to VP, SVP, like I didn't actually change it all. My title and a tool changed.
I
But the
see.
way people perceived me at the office, even people that I'd worked with for a long time, changed. And so therefore the way I have to approach meetings, have to approach interactions is very different, because the weight of your words, the weight of your feedback, the weight of even just your facial expressions carries a much different impact. And so I think for me, one of the big, and again, in retrospect, it's really obvious lessons was, being mindful of how other people perceive you is more and more important the more senior you become, because there's just more impact associated with
So
your
how
staff
long? So I'm
company.
cur so I'm curious, like how long did it take you, or or what's the time frame when you say like to be aware?
Yeah, well, and I think that's the other really hard part as you become more senior is unless you're surrounded yourself with people that provide you really. So for me specifically, it was about 6 to 9 months that I think it really took me to realize like, I think very quickly I made those mistakes, and then it probably took a good 6 to 9 months before the feedback got back to me, or I started understanding that there was an issue that I could then address.
Oh, I see.
And I think a challenge is, certainly as you become more senior, that feedback loop gets harder and harder to create unless you've built a lot of trust in your organization, right? And again, I'll speak from my experience as an engineer, when you're a frontline engineer working with peers one-on-one, if you do something that gets under their skin, my experience was they tell you right away, like, hey, cut this
Yep.
out.
Yep.
When you're a frontline manager, you tend to also have more direct interaction where, your reports will be more honest with you. They see you very frequently. People you interact with, like peer managers, you tend to interact with very frequently. They'll also really direct feedback. When you become a leader of leaders, and especially when you become even more senior than that, your touch points with people become much longer, right? It could be every other week, it could be monthly, it could be quarterly. And so if there's an issue, one is they're not seeing you that often to give you that feedback. And two, more importantly, there's just not as much of a relationship unless you fostered it. And so you're less likely to get the feedback.
Wow, what an interesting perspective, and what an interesting experience that must have been,
Yep.
going from, I mean, we talk so much about feedback, and then it's like you got it, and then you got promoted, and then it's like, okay, wait a minute, now it's that delay.
Yep.
So how did you cope with that? What, yeah, what?
Yeah. I mean, I think the first thing is it's humbling, right? I think one thing I tell people when they go into leadership is it's like you need to check your ego at the door because every day it's humbling, right? No matter how good you think you are at your job, whether it's engineering something, building a product, leading people, it's humbling no matter what. And for me, it was really going back to engineering first principles. Like, how do I build a system that's, as independent of me and independent of the people in my organization to collect feedback? And so we implemented tools and systems in my organization to collect various types of feedback. So we used a tool to regularly survey our engineers to ask them, how things were going on a technical front, how they felt about organization culture. We implemented a more thoughtful approach to retrospectives. So sprint retrospectives, which is part of agile software development. So not just focusing on what went well in the sprint, but actually asking a few more mindful questions about what was going on in the organization that could have impacted things. We gave managers a template and got feedback on that template and iterated. And then finally, I did a series of listening sessions with the whole organization where we got clusters of team members together and we sat down and just like talked about how things were going. And that was a great way of opening up trust. And so again, kind of for me, it was really how do you think about systems to get feedback? Because again, early in your career, I don't think you need to think about these things, but as you become more senior, those systems become so important.
I agree. I agree. And as an engineer, I think I always work with my clients and tell them continue believing in what you know, and just use what you know, transfer those skills. So as you said, the system in the systems thinking, just keep doing it. Now you said something earlier that the systems, I heard that, but you also said a network for feedback. So I'm curious, can you tell us more about how you built that at that level of leadership where you have this, well, uh, just making an assumption here, a trusted network where you then can receive feedback, candid feedback.
Yeah. And again, I think it's harder. It just becomes more and more important the larger your organization is. And so in my organization at Flex, it was about 150 people. So I had my direct reports, which I had very open, honest, candid relationships with. And so I felt very good about getting feedback from them. And the next layer of the organization, their direct reports, not every one of those reports uniformly felt as open and honest with me. And I think that makes sense to people. You tend to be not as open with your skip level manager, but I invested heavily in individuals that showed a willingness and openness, right, to want to give that feedback. And then asked for help candidly, right? Like every opportunity I had to interact with any of those skip levels, I asked for help. What do you think we could do differently? What do you think we can do better? And just that repetition I found really opened things. It also helps smooth out communication issues. Communication in any large organization is really hard. And as you become more senior, it turns out your words will be misconstrued more than you expect them to be. And so having folks who can help correct misperceptions, right? I think in the organization on your behalf so that you don't have to is so important to build, again, a robust, well executing system for your work.
Oh yeah, that system again. Yeah, I call that allyship to
Yeah,
build up and across.
exactly.
I can see that. Mm. Well, thanks for sharing.
Yeah.
Was there another challenge?
I think I that was my biggest challenge, to be totally honest. I really feel like, a thing that I had learned in a prior transition was the importance of stakeholders. And that really, I would say transitioning from a first leader of leaders to a more senior leader of leaders, really you transition from managing downwards to managing outwards. And I think that was another transition for me earlier in my career that I really took some time to think about. I think, for me, the reason I got into this line of work is I loved working and I loved building, and then I subsequently loved helping develop people in my team. As you become a more senior leader, though, you actually spend less and less time doing that because you're spending more and more time working with your customers, working with your stakeholders, working with your peer groups, and doing outward facing work. And so I had to actually step back and realize, one, wow, my job has changed, and that's really the focus. And then two is, how do I find satisfaction in that? And I had a great former boss who is a close friend now who said, you should just treat everybody like they're on your team. And that reframing of just like, oh, I should treat my peers, and again, not be directive, not be bossy towards them, but invest in them the same way I would invest in one of my direct reports helps me really reframe how I think about relationships, and be more effective managing outward as well as finding more enjoyment in doing that work.
Oh, I bet that was a great advice because people found you more relatable. Like I had a boss like that who wherever we went, people would stop and would shake his hand and like, okay, we need to, to get to that meeting or something. But it said a lot about his relationship that he built. And as you said, um, it's just something magical when a boss who's not your direct boss meets you and then acknowledges you, I don't know, in the hall or in a meeting. Um,
And I think it's such a simple thing too. It was, again, it's one of those obvious things in retrospect that you invest, at least I've always invested really heavily in my direct reports because I feel a responsibility to help develop them. And it was just it's really, again, obvious aha moment for me when it's like, well, actually, you should do that for everybody, right? And there, obviously there's some limits because there's only so many hours in the day, but the more that you can give, right? It's been my experience that it pays back in tenfold easily.
so that simple reframe helped you with you aligning what you wanted to the company's mission and then almost like to the, job's mission.
Yeah, I think, early on in my career when I had to go, yeah, like being very concrete, early on in my career, I still really enjoy one-on-one conversations with folks that work for me. I can help them problem solve specific issues they're having, whether it's technical or interpersonal or organizational. And turns out a lot of the work that you would do with stakeholders or peers, basically managing up and out, is not that different, but I approached it with a different mindset than I approached the mindset I had with my internal teams. Whereas my internal teams, I was looking at myself as a coach and mentor. For some reason, I didn't have that same mindset initially looking at stakeholders. And I think just really, again, reframing it into, okay, like my job here is to listen and to help coach, develop, and problem solve, just became a huge catalyst for success for me.
Thanks for sharing that. I'm happy that you shared that, and I hope that those who are listening maybe can reflect on their behaviors and on their awareness and where they are on that journey. So thank you. Now, was there something that surprised you in this transition, if anything?
Yeah, I mean, I think going back to the feedback thing, I think I was surprised at how changes in your position in the organization, the amount of impact that had. I certainly, um, because it happens gradual. It's like that frog in a pot of boiling water, right? Like you're the frog as you become a more senior leader, and your experience is very gradual change, typically a very gradual change, right? In your
Yeah.
career. Um, but others experience it very differently from the outside. And so I think that just the distance, the changes generated from people that I had previously been either close with or had a more direct kind of open relationship with, really caught me off guard in it. And just really, to me, highlighted how important it is to be mindful of how your changes in how your position in organization impacts those relationships. And just, again, just having to be really, really thoughtful continuously about it.
Hmm. Y-
Um, I think the other thing that surprised, and it didn't surprise me, I knew this going in, but uh, I knew this going in, and I believe this to be true, is actually as my experience is as you become a more senior leader, you actually have less and less control. And so it's kind of an interesting juxtaposition where you think like, hey, I lead this department. I'm responsible for all the budget allocations. Like really, like I've got all the
Oh, I
decision
see.
making, right? You actually have, ironically, significantly less control. And so again, I had this expectation going into my more senior roles, but just to the extent to which it's really true, and the extent to which you depend on everyone in the organization making good decisions to actually get things done, was a bit of a surprise.
So what was that mindset shift that helped you then cope with that? 'Cause that's a big one. I
Give
work
me
with
an,
engineering leaders. I want control and I have control and into the realizing, oh, I don't have any control.
Honestly, that's like probably the hardest part. It continues to be a challenge, I think, for me, because my experience is most engineering leaders grow up as engineers, right? And early in your career as an engineer, you're rewarded for due diligence, strong execution, detail orientation. Like this is the things that make you stand out, right?
Yes.
And then when you transition into leadership, those quickly become micromanagement, right? As a frontline leader.
I
And
know
then as
again
a,
how you're perceived. Isn't that
yeah,
interesting?
right.
Yes, from the outside.
And then as a leader of leaders, that even becomes a more toxic set of traits, right? Where you're like actually disempowering an entire organization. If you're, as the senior level leader, going
Yeah.
multiple layers in the organization to make decisions, right? Not only is that micromanagement, you're actually disempowering all the leaders underneath you.
Yeah.
And so I think that's the first, like, do you want to be that kind of leader, right? I think that's the first mental step to get over. And my hope is most people that get into leadership don't want to be that kind of leader. So then it's like, what do you do about it? So
Yes.
for me, it went back to systems, right? Like, what are the systems? And so for me, it was really two things. The first system was, how do I hire and develop great people? Like that I really, really trust and that, I believe can just go take care of this and are going to excel without me being involved. So what are our job descriptions look like? What does the organizational structure look like? Are there clear delineation of responsibilities? What are clear expectations for this person? And can we be really crisp about that? Because
I
that
see.
gives the bedrock of saying, hey, you know, uh, Joe, we agreed that your job was ABC and your goals were one, two, three. Like, and I'm going to stand out of the way and you go do your thing. And
Yes.
then we'll have accountability, right? Then you can have really good conversations about where roadblocks are happening. You can have really good conversations about when things are going well or when things are not going well, right? But you got to have that clarity and invest in that upfront, right? And the larger the organization, the more senior the role, the more important that becomes because it's easy to be very squishy. We're going to deliver some big feature release. It's like, okay, what does that mean, right? And you got to
Yeah.
really clear there.
Yeah.
The second is kind of to that accountability. What are the systems that we're going to agree to as an organization to use to check in with each other? And in my organizations, I like basically two things. We tend to use two things. One is like a monthly roadmap review. Real simple questions. What did we say we were going to do last month? How'd it go? What are we going to do next month? Why do we think that's the right set of stuff to do? And what are things leadership and stakeholders need to know? And it's a way to just create transparency and accountability so that A leader in me or a leader in whoever can understand priorities, can align on those priorities, can dive into areas that need more conversation. And the other thing I'd like to use is an operational metrics review. Hey, we agreed defects need to stay at a certain rate or costs need to stay, and you can put lots of different hiring metrics. And it's just a real factual, like we agreed to these things, how's it going? And if there's problems, what's going on? And it's not to call people out, it's to have a conversation to see how leaders are approaching those things. And again, having clear expectations about what I'm looking for and what my leaders want to get out of that helps create a lot of accountability, which then allows you to give up a lot of control, it turns out, while still being responsible for good results.
Yes, I can hear that a lot of empowerment in there, because when I know what's expected of me and where the border lines are, then I know I can run really fast because here are the lines and I can just go and then get support.
Yep.
I have a curious question because you, with the second one with the metrics, that
Yeah.
did you use that maybe constraints to create advantages and to improve creativity and innovation? Because that sometimes I hear that too with engineering leaders.
I certainly grew up in the culture of Amazon, where Amazon had this leadership principle of frugality, right? Which, really means to treat company money like it's your own, is how I always internalized it. And one of the things I liked or have enjoyed about Flex is, also to start up, you're an owner. And so every dollar you spend is basically a dollar out of your pocket. And so I think actually this idea of like, how do you create scarcity to create innovation is really, in my mind, the way I think about that is like, how do you build an organization where people feel like every dollar they spend is their dollar? Because I really believe that like,
Mm,
if you hire the right people, they're good owners, and good owners want great value, right? And so it's less about how do I create scarcity, it's more about like, how do I create a culture where people are driving after great value all the time? And that's really where I like to focus. And so the way that does show up is, yes, you do apply some resistance, friction. You can't just hire every person you want. What can you do with the people that you have? So questions I like to ask there are, if you had two more people, what could you do? If you had
mm,
if you had two less people, what wouldn't you do? If you had to reduce costs by, 20%, what would you do and have to give up? And so for me, what's
nice.
interesting is the trade-offs and how leaders approach the trade-offs. And I think that's where the really fruitful discussions happen. And that's also as a senior leader where you can have the most impact by imparting your experience on more junior leaders
Yeah.
and help them think through those trade-offs in different ways or provide different points of view that they can go consider so that they then make better trade-offs in the future.
I can see that. I can see that because we always want to let go of the things that are not so valuable. So we keep the things that are valuable. So very interesting questions that you share there. Definitely. Yeah, I can see, you know, good conversation come out when people are answering honestly and transparently. And then there's trust in the room. So
And then I think, going back to what's been surprising or challenging or different, I think your job as a senior leader, right, is much more so to help the people or the leaders underneath you go do all that detailed work that you used to do. So you're actually not doing any work, right? You're actually in large part helping those other leaders. You're downloading systems and frameworks and approaches to these other leaders so they can consider those, they can enrich those, they can make them their own, and they can run their own organization. And so much more of the role becomes actually teaching as opposed to driving outcomes, right? So early in your career, you're driving outcomes, right? You're delivering, you're making sure things happen. And as you become more senior, especially director and above, a lot of your job is actually to help those leaders which are in those seats be more successful.
so how does one and how did you get from, as you said, that's a big skills transition, mindset transition to drive results, to be a teacher, a coach, a mentor. So tell me, I'm curious, one particular skill set that you like worked on and discovered or you got help on,
Yeah.
what got you there?
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of skill sets, right? So I think that's the first thing is there's lots of different things. Um, I think really, again, it's the aha for me is that the thing that has really helped me is when I started looking at organizations and even systems of people as not that much different than software systems, because I'm very comfortable with engineering. I'm very comfortable with how, interfaces between components work, and applying those same sorts of thought processes to organizations and how groups of people interact has been very helpful for me. An area where I've really had to focus and get specific coaching is, I would say, more on the EQ side. I have a very bad poker face. This makes me, I think, easy to relate to in general, but like if I'm in a review with a team and I read something or I see something and I'm like, well, that doesn't make sense with my experience, you could just plainly see it on my face. And I don't mean anything by it, but it comes across as like, oh man, this VP thinks I'm an idiot. And so I've had to have actually like really focused coaching on just those kind of fine motor skill pieces, right? Like, and that's building systems for myself in terms of like, okay, when I go into a meeting like that, I'm going to take notes, I'm going to write, because I find that when I'm writing, my eyes are focused down. And if I have a reaction, it breaks the muscle movement in my face. Like getting down
Oh
to that
yeah.
level has really helped me personally, especially in what I would consider, now I don't do this for every meeting, but for what I would consider high stakes interactions or what I believe are important interactions.
Okay.
Having mindful systems and not just, hey, Anthony's going to be better today, or I'm going to try harder. Like
Yes.
it's having real systems to help me
Yes.
interrupt kind of ingrained behavior
Yes.
has been
Real
really, really important to
practices.
me. Yeah.
Yes, down to the practices. It's always that how, because we have the theory and engineers, I joke with them too. It's not enough that you know how to swim and what the water temperature needs to be and what clothes you need to wear. If you never jumped in the water, then it's gonna be a different experience. So that
And
practice.
I would say like in terms of those tools, like the one that has been very successful for me personally, and I've also seen others use it very successfully, is just like writing down stuff. Like if you're in a meeting and you're struggling with like how to present yourself or how to interact with somebody, like just the simple act of writing, like literally transcribing even helps slow your mind down so that your intellectual mind can be more present versus any sort of like emotional reaction. And that can break, like just the simple act of doing that, I think can make people much, much better, show up much better in meetings.
Yes, yes. You bring your literally your thoughts into the forefront in your decision. You increase your decision making, which in a meeting, in an important meeting, you want that ability right there with you.
Exactly.
Um, wow. Well, thank you very much. So we're getting to an end. I wanted to ask you if you would like to share a little bit more about what transition you're going through now with
Yeah,
us.
happy to. So I recently left Flex after 4 years, and I'm taking a professional break, which I'm very excited about to spend some time with my boys. Um, but what's interesting about that transition is the first time in my career I've really had to do this. Early on, I had a mentor who told me, as a leader, true north is pretty simple. If you find yourself not needed in your role, that means you've done a good job, right? Like, and so in an aspirational sense, right, is the way the mentor presented it to me.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's served me very well throughout my career. And I found myself at Flex actually towards the middle of last year in that situation where my team, after many years of work and development, were really functioning without my involvement in large ways. And so that was a really interesting, and did all the things to create more work for myself, et cetera, start new things, do new things. And I realized, I've actually done the thing I was hired to do. I've built the system, I've created the leaders, and now what's next for me? And what was next for me is a transition to something new. And I think it was a scary revelation at first, but really empowering. And as a leader, I think opened up my point of view on like, okay, what does success in a role really look like? And it's not just more promotion, it's not just company success, but it's the health of the organization being able to move on without you. Um, and I think for leaders in more senior roles, it's kind of an interesting thing to keep in the back of your mind is like, how do you know that the org has outgrown you so that you can leave when it's strong versus overstaying, right? Because I do think that happens, and that's unhealthy.
So Anthony, do you remember that moment when you realized it? Because I think that's what our audience is
Uh,
curious to. Was there a moment? Was there an experience? Like,
I don't know that there was like one singular moment. I certainly know that there was a gradual feeling, and I
okay,
think there may have been a singular moment. We had my family took a vacation in late August of last year, which was wonderful, and literally the day before we're going to get on a plane and be out of the country, and I'm going to be like, we had a crisis at Flex that really was all hands on deck. And I was like, oh God, I'm going to have to like not be on this flight. I'm going to have to be working this week. I'm going to have to fly out to a customer. And my team said, no, we got it.
oh,
And they had it.
wow.
And I was like, okay, like if they can step up and do this when I'm not here and coordinate themselves and manage stakeholders and even all the way up to our board, I was like, wow, like maybe I'm actually standing in the way of them doing even more. And that was, I think, that moment was very clear to me. I was like, okay, now it's time to really think about this situation differently. It was also really, really rewarding.
I bet. I mean, it must have been also this confusing moment of, okay, wait, I will I not go on the plane with my family, which we want to
Yep.
go, but I want to go and jump in and swim with the boys and girls. So be part of that challenging situation because that's really team building and it's a lot of momentum and all that. So I bet you were like, okay, I don't know what I want, and then just the team to say, no, we got this, and understanding that you value family. I mean, you said that at the beginning that one of your values is family. So for them to recognize that and support you in that, I mean, what an amazing. Abati was a you supported them, and now it was their chance to, okay, now we're gonna support Anthony here. We're gonna step up so that he can go.
Yeah. I mean, you're absolutely right. There's a lot of conflicting emotions because part of never waste a crisis. Some of the most fun memories I've had are in
I
moments like
know.
that. And to not be part of it was definitely sad, but it was also not that dissimilar as a parent to see your kid do something for the first time without your involvement. And there's a little sense of grief as they break off, but it was really awesome to see the team like break off and run without me. And that
Mhm.
then led to a lot of soul searching for myself, which is, what do I want? What opportunities are there for me? And again, I think as leaders, it's important to periodically ask yourself and have that one-on-one with yourself and be really honest, even though it can be a little scary.
Maybe a last question, last curious question before I let you go, Anthony, because you strike me as someone who uses, and you mentioned mindfulness and mindfulness practices, that you reflect. So you it tells me that you had a really high self-awareness to recognize that the team is not just the team didn't just have your back, but the team will be okay without you in a sense, and that maybe it's time for you did a good job, you did it well, they're fine, and now it's almost like, okay, you're free to dot dot dot. So what are some of the systems, techniques, practices that you use to grow yourself? And is it, reflection, gratitude journals? Oh,
Yeah.
I don't know. There's
Yeah.
something that you can share because I
Yeah.
can sense that you have a really high
Yeah.
EQ. And how did you get there?
Well, thank you for that. I I was taught something by the manager who helped me grow into my first management role. And anyone who's transitioned from an individual contributor to a manager knows like it's a very hard transition for most people, right? And you go from being great at one thing to just really like getting your butt kicked basically every day.
Yeah.
And so what this leader told me to do every Friday, write down 3 things that went well this week because of actions I took. Write down 3 things that could have gone differently because of actions I could have reasonably taken.
I see.
And
Hmm.
it's really like very simple. And so I used to do this exercise. I had a commute for a long time during that transition. And so I used to do it Friday afternoons when I was commuting home from work, just mentally do it. When I had a shorter commute or had a bus commute, I had a little journal that I wrote down. And those, I think it's really important that you do three of both, and three is really important, right? Three is because you don't want to like laundry list of everything. So it helps you focus on the most important, ideally highest impact things.
Yep.
The good is because I think it's really easy as a leader to forget that good things happen as a result of your actions. And so it's really, and it also tells you where to double down on your own skills because every
Yep.
leader is different. Some leaders,
Yep.
what makes some leaders successful would make me a complete failure. And what makes me successful as a leader would make other leaders a complete failure. And so
Yep.
it helps you focus on what makes you uniquely strong. And then the three things that you could do differently, that the way that question is constructed is really important. It's not three things I wish were different. Oh, my team didn't deliver. Like I wish they would have delivered. That's not what we're looking for. It's peeling back to say, okay, my team didn't deliver. What could I have done differently? Was I not asking the right questions? Was I putting too much trust in somebody? Was I not putting enough trust in somebody? Was I,
Yeah.
you know, not listening to the team when they told me this wasn't possible? But it's to really introspect on like, what could you as a leader have done or tried to influence differently along the way? Um, and I have found by doing that, again, three things that have gone well because of me and my actions, three things that I could have done differently this week for a different result. Every week for the last like 15 years, it's, only takes about 15 minutes once you get in the habit of it on a Friday afternoon, uh, has been a huge piece of how I focus my own personal development.
Well, thanks for sharing these little things that add up. They really
Yeah.
add up, as you said, over 15 years. Yes. And what interesting thing that happens when you start small and consistently, your mind start focusing on those. So maybe you wrote them down on Friday, but I bet that during the week, you're like, okay, this is what I'm gonna write down on Friday. Oh, yes, I noticed this, I caught this, I will remember this. And we almost build that habit of educating ourselves to then lean into our strength and then look for opportunities where we can improve.
Yeah.
Very simple way.
I love that. And I think I have to share this. So I am into Olympic weightlifting and powerlifting. And so it's one of the things I do as part of CrossFit. So there's the idea of just 1% better, right? Like you don't bench press 400 pounds or squat 600 pounds like the first day in the gym. Like you just ruin your
Mhm.
body, right? Like it's crazy. And
You're gonna be
so
done. Yeah.
yeah, and some days you're not even able to do as much as you did the day before. And so you learn to focus on the process and you learn to try and find one thing to be 1% better on every day. And that mindset, similar to this tool, right? This three things that went well, three things that could go better. It's like find ways of being 1% better all the time, little things. And if you stack those over long periods of time and you're consistent about it, really big dramatic changes happen. And that's
Yes.
to me been a really clear recipe for success.
Well, so you brought up CrossFit, so I'm like, I have to ask this because I
Yeah.
was just telling it to my client the other day. Um, have you used active rest as also an empowerment and that concept of active rest?
Not in a professional, and it's interesting. I kind of am trying it right now. I have never thought about it that way. I've not previously thought about that in a professional setting of active rest. I am taking some time right now to reset and rethink about what I want to do, and I would guess I would consider that active rest. I had not thought about it like that before, but that's a
Oh,
very cool concept. I love that actually.
wow. Well, got you intrigued when you're
Yeah.
not working out and your muscles need a break, they're still right build it. You still build the muscles even though you're not literally lifting, to put it that way.
Yeah.
So that's the active rest. Um, well, Anthony, thank you very much. As we're closing, is there something that you want to close with? Something that you wanted me to ask and I didn't ask you? You still want to share?
No, I think this has been a super fun conversation. I hope folks get something out of it. Remember it's a marathon, not a sprint. And maybe one last tidbit that my favorite boss of all time used to tell me is that when you're thinking about growth and development, one of the best things you can do is help your boss keep their desk clean. And so constantly asking like, what are ways I can help? is a really important, seems silly, but it's a really important way of helping uh, gain opportunities.
Oh, I like it. I can see value in that.
Yeah.
You Well,
Yeah.
Anthony, thank you very much for joining. Oh, and if our listeners got inspired and want to connect with you,
Yeah, I'm
what's
on LinkedIn. Hopefully we can share my handle in the show
Mhm.
notes. And I'm
I
always
will.
more than happy to connect with folks if there's any questions.
Great. Well, thank you. Keep me posted on this active rest that you're taking and what's next. Maybe we'll bring you back and
Yeah,
do another podcast. So thank you very much for joining us today.
thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.